So, Jack, my son gave me a challenge to take one of his toys to work with me and take photos of it in the office, which led me, one day recently, to be sneaking round Graham Wilkinson, the chief exec's office, getting some photos of Fillmore from Cars sitting at his desk. Do you think he'd be happy with that? Not Fillmore, I mean Graham Wilkinson. Jack? Jack? Hello, welcome to Agonomics, or to give it its new full title, Agonomics with David Udall. I'm David Udall, if you hadn't already guessed. Each week, I'm joined by colleagues from AHDB to help explain the numbers behind the stories, the economics of agriculture, as it were. In this episode, it's the turn of the Retail and Consumer Insights team to be put back in the spotlight. We'll be picking out some of the topics they'll be covering at their face-to-face conference later this month, like consumer trust in farming, the current behaviours at the tills, and how marketing campaigns play their part. Please follow or subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode. New shows drop every Wednesday at midday. Please get in touch, comment on any of AHDB's social channels, or email us agonomics@ahdb.org.uk and let us know where you're listening. And before we begin, just wanted to say thank you to Jenny Waddington and her team at Severn Trent, who hosted me recently to give them a bit of an update on agricultural markets. And they were very obliging because they also helped me with my Fillmore problem of taking photos of my kid's toy at work by allowing me to take some photos whilst I was doing the presentation. So thank you guys. It was very interesting and I enjoyed that day thoroughly. With Jack departing last week, there was some speculation on social media as to what next for the show. And our friends at the Association of Independent Meat Suppliers were half right when they asked if it will be a little bit like Have I Got News For You with a different sidekick each week. So I'm kicking things off with a couple of colleagues. There's no mystery words to try and slip in unnoticed this time, but my guests and I have been tasked with slipping some song titles in throughout the podcast. So I'm challenging you to guess the musical act, and the answer will be revealed at the end. Anyway, that's Martin, the producer's master plan. Some might say we're going to wing it, but I don't know. We'll see where we go. So this week we have the Retail and Consumer Insight team coming to speak to us about their upcoming conference. And it is a face-to-face event on the 17th of October in Solihull. There are still spaces, so we'll make sure to put the link in for people to sign up. And if you're a farmer, if you're a processor, if you're involved in the supply chain and you want to go, everyone is welcome. We're going to be covering all of the big topics and issues and areas that we work in the world of retail and consumer insight. So it is something that will be very interesting and will definitely cover a lot of things and have something for everyone. So if you haven't signed up, I would thoroughly encourage you to do so. So joining me on the show this week, we have Steve Evans and Kim Heath. And Steve, I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right. With respect to the conference and kind of some of the work that's ongoing within it, what are the big things that we're going to be covering?
Yeah, thanks, David. It's also good to be back, so as a returning on episode 3, and I hope you're not missing Jack too much and you can stop crying your heart out over that one. So in terms of the conference, yeah, it's a fantastic opportunity for us to actually get in front of people in the industry to talk about the work that the Retail and Consumer Insight team do. So we have done online webinars over the last couple of years, and we are returning back to face-to-face what we did pre-COVID. So yeah, in terms of a couple of things that we are looking to cover on the day, one of the first ones that we've got is around consumers' trust in agriculture. So we look obviously a lot in the industry around sort of the role of farmers or the role of processors. But this is our annual survey where we've been doing it for over 5 years now, and it's an opportunity to actually for us to look at the value that consumers place in farmers and farming. A little bit of a spoiler alert for the conference is that the levels of trust are extremely high, and actually it's a big wave of positivity that continues from consumers towards farming, with over 67% being very positive towards British agriculture. And just to kind of give that in the context, it's been sort of in the sort of early 60s for the last couple of years, and is the level that we're currently seeing now is on par, well, it is actually 1% higher than where it was in COVID, where we actually found a lot of consumers looked towards farmers and the industry, and were sort of a lot of positivity around the work that farmers did around, in those difficult times to get food and provide for British families. So some fantastic results that are coming up there. Within that study, we go a bit deeper in terms of what kind of trust means to consumers, and we also ask them across different professions. So we know through that farmers are up there with teachers and either side of teachers and doctors in terms of professions that are seen as trustworthy. We also will be talking and exploring the opportunities for the agricultural industry about harnessing that power of farmers. So we know that where consumers value farmers, they're up there as being experts and caring about people. They also score more highly than other areas of the supply chain about caring about the planet, caring about animals, and delivering on promises. So some great messages out there for farmers and how we could harness that through the supply chain. One of the areas of opportunity that we'll be talking about as well is around that kind of role of communication to consumers. So it's the one area that farmers maybe don't score as highly on, that consumers don't necessarily hear or have heard from farmers in particular. So I know some of the work that we do within AHDB looks to try and harness that kind of power and messaging, certainly for some of the wider reputational topics like the environment and welfare and buying British, and being very much that kind of forefront of consumers' minds when we're trying to advocate some of those areas. So we also know through that trust study that we'll be covering around the role of informing consumers about what consumers do and how farming works. So we know the sort of levels of trust actually increase for those that say they're well informed, go up to like 80%, versus those that are poorly informed slightly lower. So it's really important, although the majority of people feel they are well informed, to really kind of continue that kind of program to get farming messages out to consumers. And certainly the study kind of highlighted to us that there is that kind of interest in farming and what farmers do. So I think it's a really great opportunity at the conference to hear about that mechanism of trust, but also through the day we'll be exploring a little bit more about how we might integrate that in the supply chain. And admittedly, when you start getting to the supermarket shelves, you see lots of different messaging out there, not just that kind of farming message. You start looking at messaging around the actual products and what meal sort of repertoires it might fit.
You've made a really interesting point there, Steve. Well, two really interesting points from my perspective. The first one is around the evidence of that, is that I think it is really important that there is an actual factual source of independent evidence with regards to the trust that consumers have in farmers, and that we're able to provide that. And it links into a whole load of other areas of work that we do as well. And the second one, I think, comes back to communication. And it's something that I think we see a lot of, especially if you kind of trawl farming social media. There's a lot of talk about how that communication from the farm level to the consumer level needs to improve to show everything that farmers are doing with regards to environmental benefits, as well as just some of the general challenges of farming. And we've spoken, about the economic and financial aspects of those on this podcast many times. But do you think there's enough places within sort of events and opportunities within the sort of the farming year for the whole supply chain to come together? Do you think there's enough of a targeted approach to try and bridge that gap, or is there more? Is there either a little bit of work or a lot more work that you think needs to be done to bridge that gap between farmers better communicating the benefit and continuing to build on that positive trust platform that they already have?
Across the year, when you look across the supply chain, there's lots of events out there, aren't there? So, it's hard to kind of say we haven't got enough events, we should have more. Hopefully our kind of conference will be a good opportunity to link up that kind of farmer and sort of end consumer. But I think some might say that there is opportunity to actually go within the current events to start putting consumers on their radars. So we find, certainly for some of the events that we go to, we might go out with our KE teams, knowledge exchange teams, and go and talk to farmers. And sometimes that end consumers slots aren't always on those kind of sessions and repertoire. When we go and do those sessions, they land really well. And I think it really helps each stage in the supply chain to almost know what's ahead of them. So we know that from a farmer's perspective, there's probably lots of events that they could get invited to that are very much more focused in on their actual practices. But I'd also challenge to kind of say, well, it's also important that they know what's follows in the supply chain and what's up and coming for them. And sometimes that helps them understand what some of the either specifications that are coming to them from sort of further down the supply chain, or just understanding that kind of long-term shift. I know when I've talked to farmers before about that kind of, people aren't eating roast dinners as much as they used to, sort of going back 20, 30 years ago. And when you explain it to go, well, that has an impact on, you know, the levels of roasting joints that we're selling over a 5-10 year period, which means it puts more emphasis on different meat cuts. I think the kind of penny drops a lot, and I think farmers really appreciate that. And at the same time, we've gone as a retail and consumer insight team, we've gone to those sessions with processors and with retailers where we're making sure that the voice of the farmer is kind of known there, around sort of, well, they're a trustworthy reputational group there that have a great message to tell about how food's produced, what has gone into that kind of production, which means that when you're a processor or retailer trying to get health messaging on there, sustainability messaging, you're able to tell the story much more. And I think it's that telling the story that adds the value to what is done in agriculture, but also the end product to the consumer, so they value it as well.
You know, the work that you guys do and the information you put out is so valuable, because for significant segments of the levy payer base that we have, this is just the demand side of the industry. Like you said, we talk a lot about the supply side, and we're talking about cattle numbers, slaughter rates, etc. But actually what you guys are looking at is the demand side, and from a farmer perspective. And when, again, we think about long-term investment in businesses, we've spoken about resilience of farm businesses, and then the commodity cycle of how markets change and move, especially when you're looking into the world of beef, lamb, dairy, and the long production cycles that are involved. This is a multi-year approach to look at, and business planning needs to take multi-year understanding. And so, yeah, understanding that demand side is hugely important. So I suppose that's kind of in the bigger picture of it. But if we look, I suppose, at the shorter term, Steve, in terms of where the current consumer landscape is, this is again something that's going to be covered off in the conference, isn't it? And the big question, really, even though we're still moving out of that inflationary period and coming off the back of COVID, we're moving further away from that point when you'd probably say the market was in a normal state pre-COVID, and if we're ever going to get back to that. So what's the current landscape on that consumer side?
Yeah, like you say, the other hot topics is around that consumer landscape. And we're kind of, in that session, we're going to be delving into what's being eaten in the home. So what we're finding overall is that the levels of meals eaten in their home are still higher than what we had pre-COVID, but they're starting to dip a little bit. And that's like a little bit more optimism coming back from consumers, and the eating out market also doing well. But also we're a little bit more mobile now than we were in terms of working in offices and out and about a lot more. So that has an impact, a massive impact in like what we eat in the home. And that's what we'll be kind of covering a little bit more at the conference. So the dynamics of the meal occasions in the home varies a little bit. So the lunchtime occasion in the longer term was the one that saw the biggest rise because we were at home more and having more lunches when we would have been out and about. So in the last year, that's had a big impact. But what we've also found, interestingly enough, is like with consumers, they're kind of switching around their meals a little bit. So if you are spending time at home, you can also have different types of meals. So the kind of hot meals at lunchtime and evening meals, sometimes we're finding numbers swap around a little bit around like soups and pastas. So typically you'd have like soup at lunchtime, pasta in the evening, and rightly or wrongly, there's not like a sort of a right way or wrong way of having this round, but we're seeing lots of consumers actually doing things in a different sort of order. But also that has a big impact on the number one biggest dish. I love that it gets called a dish, by the way, in our Kantar coding, is the traditional sandwich, which is still the most popular meal eaten in the home. That sort of has a big impact on those sandwich levels, which then has a knock-on impact to certain categories. So, the sliced cooked meat, etc., and certainly for ham. So if you're looking at the pork industry and stuff, it's had certain dips. So we've seen slightly lower levels and people going into different areas. We're snacking less. Don't know about your own eating habits, David, but the ones that we've seen from consumers have shown that they're cutting back on their snacks. So I think, there's a little bit there around sort of, potentially around trying to manage their costs and things, but also in the longer term, what we looked at, which is coming back a little bit, is health in the longer term. So usually when optimism comes back, people start to think about health in a bit more of a positive life as well. So we're also seeing snacking decline. So what we're going to cover at the conference is just go into a little bit of those findings, a little bit more depth. We're also going to highlight some of our recipe work that we've done.
Right. Well, as I've got two experts in retail and consumer insight with me, I'll let you judge my consumer habits, Steve. Here we go. So you asked about my eating habits. I'm in that trend of flipping round meal times. Breakfasts for dinner has been a big thing in my household recently. Bacon sandwiches for dinner, bacon, egg, and beans. Simple, I know, but fantastic. My food this morning, my breakfast was leftover apple crumble with some yogurt and some sultanas on top, probably to make me feel like I was doing myself something good. Am I a trendsetter or am I just following the crowd?
I'd say, David, that you give me faith here of when we see these data points coming through that actually consumers do lots of bizarre things and lots of different orders. And there's not always, you question the data and you look at it and you go, if someone really had that for breakfast? And there it is. It's real life, isn't it? It's like, it's the practicalities of consumers making the most out of what they've got in the home, but the dynamics of their lifestyles and behaviors and what their families are doing, what the kids want, what the practicalities if they've got to rush out to work, if they're not. So it all has an impact.
And you remind me, actually, so I had to go to London for work recently. I had to get up early in the morning, get on the train. I took one of my son's cookies, like a out of the pack, and I was have that, and I put it in my bag, and I took it. And obviously, in the world of modern trains, it was just completely rammed, so I had to stand all the way. And after a couple of minutes, I was like, "Oh, I've got that cookie in my bag." And I leant down and went to open the cookie and go in, and I pick it out, and I realise I've got like 8 people who are all in about 4 feet of me, just staring at me eating a cookie. And it was very awkward. It was very awkward. I probably should have took some like granola or yogurt or something instead, but I think they were just looking, why has he just got a cookie in the bag that he just pulled out?
I think you've hit on something, David, which is another podcast, isn't it? Stealing your children's food. I have a confession. I once ate their Easter eggs, like not all of them, but like we didn't have any chocolate in the house. We were in need of the chocolate that evening, and yeah, we had to replace them. But we had about a 2-day window when we were like hadn't got the eggs, and we were like, if they find out, this is like, do you know what I mean? We talk about trusting farming. This is like trusting your parents, isn't it? We all have those moments where you think we just need, and it's always in the house, isn't it?
You're there eating your chocolate, thinking you're going to live forever, and the kids are just crying in their bed, Steve.
Resilience, isn't it, David? Long-term resilience. It's teaching them.
Let's take a break. We're going to go and get the latest market information. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Kim Heath, and we're going to be talking about insight and looking at some specific categories as well.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 6th of January. Despite some support in wheat markets over the Christmas period, prices have been under pressure in the new year from a strengthening US dollar, technical selling and sluggish global demand. However, Russian wheat crop conditions remain in focus, with warmer than usual temperatures and excess moisture in key growing regions. Persistent hot and dry weather in Argentina is also raising concern over the country's maize crop, which is now in its critical development stage. For rapeseed, new crop prices are supported, with doubts over prospects for global rapeseed production in 2025, though forecasts of heavy soybean supplies from South America limit any major price increases. Over the next few weeks, weather in major exporting countries such as South America and Russia will be key in driving prices. The USDA will also release updated global supply and demand estimates at the end of this week. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat, and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy, and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Right, we've just heard the latest from the markets and what's going on. And in that interlude, what you didn't hear, but just to confirm, our producer Martin also admitted to stealing Easter eggs from his children and in a worse situation than Steve, didn't replenish them. Shocking behaviour from a man that we felt we had more respect for. Now we're worried about him completely. But moving on to something more interesting and more insightful, we have Kim Heath with us for the second half of the podcast from the Retail and Consumer Insight team at AHDB. Kim, thinking again for the conference. So again, as a reminder, we've got our Retail and Consumer Insight conference, a face-to-face event in Solihull on the 17th of October. There are still spaces to sign up and attend. And another reason to attend, Kim, is that we're going to be talking about how we take the insight that we have and put it into action through our marketing campaigns. Am I right?
That is completely right. I mean, I'm quite distracted by thinking about the fact I'm going to steal my little girl's Easter eggs. She's only one, but I can start buying them from age 2, right? So
that makes it easier because she's so young.
So yeah, that's what I'm here to talk to you about. So the session I'm going to be doing at the conference is about showcasing how AHDB marketing campaigns are grounded in insight. And the reason why they need to be is we need to ensure that the consumer is at the heart of everything we do. Kind of working in the industry and being close to food and farming, we may think that one creative idea is great and we should roll with it. But actually, to an everyday consumer, it might not be. So we need to make sure that we listen to consumers to ensure our marketing campaigns are efficient in terms of driving attitudinal change and market growth little by little. I'm presenting this session with Kat Harwood, who's the director at Two Ears, One Mouth. She works at our partner agency for our campaign consumer research, and we'll be taking you through research techniques that we use during marketing strategy planning, campaign development, and then also post-launch as well, campaign evaluation and optimization. So, for example, we'll showcase some of the highlights from our recent quantitative and statistical analysis, as well as our focus groups, and we're actually going to be showing you some recordings from recent focus groups so you can hear directly from consumers. And we'll be using the latest Let's Eat Balance campaign as an example to bring it to life. So we'll be showing how we started with 5 completely different creative ideas and ended with one campaign that ultimately launched. Don't get me wrong, it had to evolve through the consumer research. I remember something about a shot with a man eating food and it was all in his beard, and people found that quite disturbing. So there was a small change there. But the campaign that we did launch in the end must have been great because it drove 13.8 million additional sales for beef and lamb and generated just over 230,000 additional buyers for the category.
This is one of those areas of work that we have across AHDB and across the economics world in particular that is multifaceted, that it isn't singularly just directed at levy payers, that spend is used in multiple ways because we use this information, as you said, for the marketing campaigns. It's informative for levy payers, and something that we've not mentioned in this world because we're kind of focusing domestic, but we also look at international retail and consumer insight, which helps the exporting side of the business as well. So there's a huge amount of information that we have that's valuable for a lot of different stakeholders. And whilst this podcast has changed because Jack has left, there are still some things that haven't changed within it. And that is whatever you write in the script and the information we will read. And in the next part of the script, it says, David, tee up a question about retail so we can shoehorn in Grace's session. So Grace in the retail team has also said we must talk about her session. So Kim, over to you so we both don't get in trouble and we cover Grace's session.
Good idea. So yes, there will also be a session which is showcasing how our insight work helps the retail team and has actually resulted in changes to the in-store and online meat offerings. So, for example, our insight has changed how aisles look, how fixtures, fins, barkers, online meat product pages, home pages, how they've all changed slightly to improve conversion. And this session gives a great overview of exactly why we did that and how we did that. So what we should be communicating to consumers in store and online, and at what points to drive more products in basket. So there's some real good learnings in there. And also with that session, there's a great panel discussion involving some of those external stakeholders who have actually been involved in making those changes in supermarkets, which all of those will be showcased on the day.
And I noticed that actually when I went shopping, and I was picking up some beef mince for dinner, and you could tell that the whole red meat aisle was kind of, it was in Sainsbury's, and it was changed with like steak, and it was kind of all showing off. And it was also where I had a brilliant moment when you see someone in the supermarket that you're not expecting. I bumped into one of the ladies that works at my son's preschool, and it was evidently that moment of, I only ever see you at the door of preschool. How do you have a normal conversation? And it does. So we just did the awkward kind of like, "Are you right?" kind of thing, and walked past each other. And when I think of the meat aisle, that is now what I think of. So further areas that we're going to cover, Kim, in the conference as well, we're going to be looking at sort of diving into category trends in particular, aren't we? And in the afternoon, we're going to be looking at specific sessions going into more detail on meat and dairy.
Steve mentioned a lot of consumer trends earlier, and we have 2 deep dive sessions in the afternoon, one specifically for meat, one for dairy, where it takes those current consumer trends that have already been covered, but really tailors them to those categories. And the key point of them is to pull out the opportunities for those sectors. And some of the themes that we're going to be covering, Steve has already mentioned, but they go into more depth, is about health, sustainability, meal repertoires and dishes, value for money. And what's good about these sessions is they are going to include workshops. So there's going to be a great opportunity for people in the audience and people in the industry to discuss these kind of hot topics with one another and others in the supply chain. So there'll be some great conversation coming out of those, I'm sure.
Great. Thank you, Kim. I suppose the more important question is, for anyone listening to this podcast that doesn't already look at our information regularly, how can they find out more about the retail and consumer insight that we provide?
Yep, so on the AHDB website, there's a retail and consumer insight section. And the best thing to do is to sign up to our newsletter, which is available on there, and you will get updates on what information has been released.
And we'll make sure we link directly to that in the blurb for the podcast as well. So just as a reminder, there are still spaces available. 17th of October, Retail Consumer Insight, person to person, real life, none of this digital Teams nonsense, real actual people talking to each other about important stuff. 17th of October in Solihull. Make sure you're there. It will be thoroughly interesting. And to finish with, at the start, we said rather than doing a mystery word, we were going to slip in some song titles throughout the podcast. And you may have noticed some of those. My favourite song title, which we didn't put in, more because there's a typo within it that Martin put in, was a song that was called Stand By Me, but there was a B instead of the D, so it comes across as Stabbed By Me. And I didn't really want to try and get that in anywhere because I couldn't find a way to shoehorn that in. But for the eagle-eared of you that would have noticed, it was Oasis. And indeed, Steve, my heart has been crying out for Jack since he left. But I'm thoroughly over it. You've been my therapy session, you two, today, getting over it. And I am sure we are on for bigger and better things in the podcast as we go. So thank you both for joining me.